All right, so I am doing a podcast today on public sector. It's our focus. The reason I wanted to do that is tomorrow we have a Salesforce Innovation Day that is being hosted by Carasoft, and Salesforce are coming to Hawaii, and it got me thinking that this would be a great opportunity to talk about what's happening in public sector and talk through some use cases. And I have here with me Bob Muellner from Salesforce. I've known Bob for a number of years. We've partnered together on some public sector projects here in Hawaii, and always a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Well, pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And I think what's especially cool about you, Bob, is that you have a lot of experience and you've seen some things in the public sector. You've seen some transformations probably over the years, not just in Hawaii, but in general. I know you've covered a broader territory. And I think that your perspective will be really, really cool to hear, not maybe even just the context that you have, but also what's happening in the Salesforce space, because that's obviously what's of interest to me.
Well, thank you. So yeah, just a little bit of background.
Yep.
For those that are listening, my name is Bob Muellner. I've been at Salesforce now for almost 6 years. Part of that I was with Oracle. And prior to that, I was with a number of software companies, services, and hardware companies. It's interesting always when I think of how long I've been coming into Hawaii over the past 25 years, started back in 1994 when I was working for Matsushita, and Panasonic has an office over in Aiea, that I would be part of my visiting office whenever I was here. And during those 25 years of time, I've had the opportunity to spend time with a number of accounts, both commercial as well as public sector. And the areas that I've covered in the part of the U.S. has also been kind of the western states, the 13 western states over that period of time. And having worked with organizations pretty much during that period, it's been mostly with governments and mostly with state and local. And state and local does present a challenge. There are a lot of legacy systems that have been in place that go beyond those 25 years, 30, 40, sometimes even more. And the whole aspect of innovation, companies that I've worked for, especially Salesforce, our focus is on innovation, and sometimes that runs counter to governments and how they particularly procure and the requirements that they put out in order to be able to meet the challenges that they have.
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's definitely a different world, not just in Hawaii, but I think public sector in general. Just everything kind of makes it challenging. But I think there are some upsides. I think what I would be interested in hearing, Bob, from you is, you've been coming to Hawaii for a number of years. You've been, and I don't want to pick on Hawaii, it's more just public sector in general.
Sure.
What are some of, what would you say has maybe been a really rewarding project that you've seen, some really cool wins for the public that have been a result of the Salesforce implementation or other technology implementation?
I think that, first of all, in general, then I'll get specific.
Yep.
So generally, because as I mentioned before, the fact that government does take a bit of time in order to make that shift and transition to things that are much more innovative, to go from mainframe to servers to cloud, is a long period of time for that to occur.
Yep.
And time is a critical element in public sector. So one of the most gratifying elements sometimes is spending time with a city, with a county, with a state, and then seeing that innovation take place. And I can have probably, at least a dozen or so stories. I'll take the city of San Diego, for example. Yep. 8th largest city in the United States. Great place to live, great environment, great weather, and again, a lot of innovative companies that are in San Diego. But again, being able to have that type of interaction between the city, provide the services that the citizens are looking for, doesn't really happen overnight. So when we went in there back in 2015 and presented to the city was really responsive in terms of what they were looking for to engage with their citizens, better improve the services for the agencies of the city, but try to get out from under the legacy systems that they already had. And how do they do that? And they took an approach that would allow them to collaborate much more freely amongst one another. And one of the things that we always see with 311 systems or CRM systems, and again, customer relationship management or constituent relationship management systems, is that you don't always have that collaboration. And when we did the project in San Diego, after we got done with the pilot, we were able to establish 10 departments right from the beginning to be able to share information and share data back and forth. Cool. And that was very satisfying. Long Beach is another one. It's a relatively new customer, but it took 4 years from the time they actually got a consultant together, wrote the requirements, filled out the procurement, and we actually got to the final win.
Awesome.
So those are areas in which they're satisfying for me. I think operationally,
Yep.
areas in which I've seen some fantastic gains in Los Angeles, for example, LA Metro is a regional authority for the Los Angeles area. It covers the county and a lot of transit agencies within the county. They completely modified the way in which they engage their riders through this TAP program. So TAP stands for Transit Access Pass. It's a smart card.
Yep.
It allows riders to be able to tap their card, whether they're riding on a bus or subway or light rail, and be able to have fare product taken from that card. They were using an old system that they had put in place, the integrations were poor, and what they were finding that the citizens, the riders, and trying to go to a website really had a difficult time being able to load fare product, even know how to report a lost or stolen card. Well, we modernized that, revolutionized it, and I didn't even actually have to hint at this. The customer actually came up with the name of the project called TapForce.
Nice.
Again, that was personally satisfying. And so that project now is in its second phase, and we're added bike locker, bike share, microtransit,
That's awesome.
being able to handle parking, electrical vehicle charging, you name it. All kinds of different services are available on that smart card. So those are the types of things that I see as really rewarding, being able to see the citizens have dividends paid to them by their local government and be able to actually use it on a day-to-day basis.
Those are cool stories. I know in Hawaii, I would say that it's been a little newer for our state to adopt Salesforce, but I think those opportunities are coming. I feel like for me, what's interesting in Hawaii is just those. I feel like people initially, and it's not just a public sector thing, I think it's across the board. Sometimes they have an outdated technology or they have a problem they're trying to solve. And when they look at Salesforce, they're immediately kind of thinking one for one. And all of a sudden, I've noticed that what's rewarding, as we go through this process, is this aha moment where like, oh, I could do that too, and then I can do that too, and then they start adding in all these things that they can do. It's almost like that starting point is, I'm just trying to replace this, or I'm just trying to problem solve X, right? And then can Salesforce do that? And of course it can. And then all of a sudden when they start seeing it, getting their hands on it, and really working with it, then they start to realize like, wow, this could do a whole lot more. And your stories kind of demonstrate that add-on, right? That journey that people are taking to keep adding on to it and building on that platform. So do you find like customers are coming to you with pre kind of already having an innovation, or are they having, or maybe a little bit of both, right? Where they're starting and saying, I'm just trying to solve a problem, help me solve the problem first? Or what do you see your public sector customers
Again, it
really
depends
do?
upon where they are on that curve.
Yeah.
And so in some areas, in some municipalities, they may be a little bit farther along when it comes to establishing or understanding cloud. And so in that case, they understand the term of platform. They know what platform is.
Yep.
In the 6 years that I've been at Salesforce, it's really been a matter of evangelizing not only what Salesforce does, but just what the whole idea or the concept of a platform is. And we usually liken it to like your smartphone, your smart device, whether you're an iPhone user and your iOS or your Google and Android. Being able to download applications to your phone is much like downloading an application into Salesforce or building an application in Salesforce. It's all around configuration. And so in that regard, so many times, especially again, and this is always a depends kind of question.
Yeah.
Because you can have a large agency, especially one that's in health and human services, where there's a lot of funding that comes from the federal government. The federal government is going to set guidelines, requirements that they stipulate that are necessary for that agency to follow, and so that may constrict them, and it can sometimes really makes a much more narrower vision when it comes to a solution, whether it's around CHIP or SNAP, TANF, child welfare, child support, whatever it might be. When it comes to cities and counties, sometimes it can be much broader because you're not necessarily constricted by that federal funding. And so they'll have a broader vision and realize, okay, this is something that we can do and also grow as in addition to it. But one of the things that's been very rewarding here in Hawaii has been, again, going past that learning curve and having the support of a number of key individuals here at the state, and I'll maybe get into that a little bit later, but that's really made a difference. And we're starting to see a lot of momentum. I think we currently have 13 orgs here on the state and looking to expand that even further. And the idea of that notion of, like you said, I can do that. I can build this application. I can build a grants app, or I can replace this old Access database. That's the kind of stuff that we get people excited about, that they can really develop it. And you don't, again, as you well know, you don't have to be a coder. It's drag and drop. It's clicks, not code. And that's also what makes it much more democratic. It opens it up just even beyond IT.
Yeah. So when you first, kind of backtracking a little bit, because I think people originally, people don't think immediately of Salesforce equal public sector solution. And so how do you explain that to someone when they're like, gee, Salesforce, government? Because I feel like now, maybe it's just that I'm more ingrained in it over the last several years, but how has that journey been for you, kind of switching from, I think people know like Oracle, yeah, big solution, it's in their mind, it's been there for a long time. How do you tell that story when you're first coming into people like Salesforce?
Well, it's a 20-year-old company. It's taken some time, but now that we're 20 years old, I feel like as I mentioned, it is evangelization. It is getting out there and spreading the word. And usually we always have to explain for those that are not familiar with Salesforce, the genesis of Salesforce automation and even the term SFA and what that meant at the time and what that means now, and how that transitioned to CRM, and how the fact that C, even though it's customer, also means citizen, also means constituent. And even in this day, because of more service orientation, citizens are customers to government.
Exactly.
Coming out of the recession, there was kind of a catch-up, if you will, because leading up to 2008, before the recession hit, we were seeing governments being much more responsive to their citizens. And then when that recession took place, then governments became much more focused on keeping the lights on, being much more conservative. In the wake of that, 2012, 2013, we started to see a shift, kind of a fourth generation almost, of CRM and 311 and those types of services that citizens were really needing for a long time, but government was now able to deliver. And with cloud, it became much easier, much scalable, much more scalable and more fast and much more quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, got you.
I'm talking too fast.
With your experience, what would you say has been the more difficult side of because we'll talk about some positive things. We've talked about some positive things. But what do you say from a public sector perspective? Do you see them being challenged when they're dealing with a Salesforce implementation? Like, what have you observed over the years as maybe the challenges that they face and have difficulty overcoming?
Well, I feel like our customers, governments, it's kind of like mom and dad in the front seat. And we're on a journey. And we're the kids in the back seat going, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Because that's how quickly we can develop applications. Yeah. And the idea of government is obviously risk mitigation and obviously making sure that money is spent properly. It is, after all our money that they're spending. Mm-hmm. And so with that said, they tend to move much more in a measured fashion. Whereas with Salesforce, we can move at lightning speed. Mm-hmm. And so that's an area where expectations between ourselves and our government customers sometimes don't always meet. So it's trying to set those expectations ahead of time. So what that also goes hand in hand with is change management. Yep. And so change management is phenomenally this large rock we need to move. Yes. And you have, as you run into, there's kind of those three groups. There's the quick adopters, there's the laggards, and the ones in the middle. Mm-hmm. And it's really kind of working towards those people that you think are going to be slower, to work towards them and get them excited, get them to move forward. And the other thing too is I think the idea of having someone dedicated or at least focused on the project. I know, and this whether it's here in Hawaii or elsewhere, the idea of having someone that you rely on or you have faith in to run a project for you is great, because again, back to that risk mitigation piece. However, if they're working 2 jobs or 3 jobs, that project's going to take 2 or 3 times longer. Yeah. And so being able to understand that, I need to have a man, a woman who can be in charge of this project and really devote his or her time to it to make sure that it can get done with the speed with which it can get done. Yeah, I would say that from my experience to it, and again, I think it's definitely not just on the public sector side, but if I were to classify certain things, and maybe you can comment on this, but is definitely the user side change management, because it is typically old technology or no technology moving on to a solution like Salesforce. And that person that you mentioned, like having somebody at the tip of the spear to really own and lead and manage that through that change, because at the end of the day, they have to feel like they own the solution, because they're going to be the ones living and dealing with that on a day-to-day basis. And the ones that do, obviously, they have greater success when they have that. I would say change management's one. And along with change management, what I've noticed is the challenge, and I think it's related to change management, is the technologists, right? They've got our governments have people that have been working with older technology or different technology, we could say, and then all of a sudden
they're being introduced to this new world, and it comes down to time, it comes down to just completely different mindset of how to approach projects. And so I feel like the technologists sort of sometimes can get left behind, right? Like if they, like you said, things are moving quickly, projects going ahead, the implementers moving things along, and the technologists are kind of sitting there going like, who's going to own this after this is done? Like, and they're, trying to play catch up or get kind of caught behind that. So I've seen that in the public sector more so than I would say on the commercial side. Not that it doesn't happen in both spots to some extent, but have you seen that, like, outside of our territory, where there's that?
Well, I think that in government in general, what's happened so many times, and again, back to federal projects, those that are funded for the federal government, is that the notion of having these big transfer systems, and again, a lot of the large SIs have developed systems that are, again, in the social services sphere, family services, healthcare, and they'll take a solution that worked in one state and they'll bring it to another state. And what ends up happening is that particular agency in that given state that it's now a recipient of this transfer system, they're focused on just that, whether in the old days it was a green screen or it's client server now or now cloud, is that tends to be so much of their focus that they don't have that broader vision of what the art of the possible is with a particular technology to go beyond just what their use case is. And so that's the part where you have departments now, agencies, for example, even here in Hawaii, where you have a visionary. And he or she sees, well, here is what we actually can do, and is bringing those people along. Like you said, it's those technologies that may get left behind. You need to be able to bring them with you. And one of the things that we feel at Salesforce that we do a really good job at, and try to translate that into actionable learning, is through Trailhead and our customer success teams. And Trailhead is free, and it's great because not only can you use it for an existing customer, for a project that's coming up, but you can also use it for those that are even not customers. I know I was just recently at a conference here last week on the Big Island, and we talked about how can the future of Hawaii be enhanced to the point where we have children, K-12, P through 12, higher education being taught those things that are going to be relevant for the 21st century. So that ultimately the roles that are in government, the roles that are in commercial, nonprofit, education are such that are ready and primed for that to occur. And one of the ways we talked about this is, for example, with Trailhead, employing workforce development here at the state or any state or local government, and working between workforce development, Salesforce or Trailhead, maybe local libraries, to be able to put together a program that allows free, no-cost capabilities to learn about developing, whether you're an architect, developer, or administrator.
Let's talk about that, because that's something that we've had past conversations about. It's something my company is looking at getting more involved in and help spearhead here in Hawaii. Explain how that could work, because I'm going to be jumping into that world, and maybe we transition a little bit to Hawaii, if you like, because I know there's a lot of cool things happening now. But I love the idea of workforce development, early age, all the way through, and involving the community. I love that Salesforce already has a program kind of centered on that. Can you explain more about how that could work for us?
Absolutely. So Trailhead is a learning management, or we like to call it more of a learning experience system. And so having the ability to go online to Trailhead, and the reason for the name is that we are taking our customers or prospective customers on a journey. And so your journey always begins at the Trailhead. And Trailhead is a platform that, again, the word platform, to be able to allow an individual to learn how to develop in Salesforce, learn more about the Salesforce ecosystem. Again, as I mentioned, either administration or development or architecture within the Salesforce ecosystem. But it's done in a way that's simple, through gamification. You earn badges, and through a series of trail mixes.
Are you going to tell me how many badges you have?
No, I tell you what, I'll brag about some of my colleagues' children and the number of badges that they have, because they're like scores of badges. And I always find that just impressive as heck that you can have a 13-year-old girl that has almost 100 badges. But I'm not going to talk about that. But with that said, the whole idea of that gamification makes it fun to learn. And by going through a set of trail mixes through workforce development, so the principle would be this, is some people have access to technology, others don't. So one of the ways in which this can be done is to partner with local libraries so that you have a place where individuals can go and be able to use a library computer to be able to then access the internet, to access Trailhead.
Mm-hmm.
Workforce development, they can be part of the programmatic element by taking the courses that are in Trailhead, create a curriculum that then allows you to go through a matriculation process so that at the end, not only you badged, but then through workforce development, they can help fund the certification exam.
Love
So
that.
this way,
That's
for
so
someone
cool.
who's looking to change their careers, maybe
Mhm.
doesn't have a career, doesn't have a career path, maybe they're trying to figure out what I want to do, maybe going through liberal arts wasn't the area that they thought it was going to be, architecture, whatever it might be, and so they want to make it, change
Nothing
in
wrong
lives.
with that, though.
Nothing wrong. Technology, though, has the ability to,
Yeah.
again, be very democratic and
Yeah.
offer people the opportunity to go
That's a good
sometimes
point.
above and beyond. So with that said, being able to allow workforce development then to help fund it, if they pass their certification exam,
Mhm.
then between ourselves and workforce development, look to be able to help place them. And especially here in Hawaii, there are a number of customers
Absolutely.
on the commercial side, education, nonprofit, government, federal, civilian, state and
Absolutely.
local, that are looking for talented people that know Salesforce to help
Mhm.
them build their applications. And so that's repeatable whether you're here in Hawaii or whether you're in California or New York, Florida,
Yeah.
doesn't matter.
Every project I'm telling my customers, who's going to be your admin? Who's going to take this over? And a lot of times they're like, we're not sure yet, and it's tough because they're looking for that skill set, and being able to introduce them to a program like this where they could start to get into it would be amazing. So that's very, very cool. Have you seen that program executed in another place?
Well, I know that, and I'm doing a little bit of plagiarism here and stealing from my colleague across the country. So there's a good buddy of mine in southeastern part of the U.S. that actually was working on this in South Florida. And so we're looking to try and bring this to the West and make this happen out here, not only in Hawaii, but in California and other states as well. But again, the idea of Trailhead being a free resource that's there that can be used. One of the other things, on the way coming over here today, I was riding in an Uber, and the gentleman who was driving me over here, his wife is active duty military in the Marine Corps based here in Hawaii, and they've traveled a bit. And we talked about a program called VetForce. And so VetForce is a program that's been around, I'm going to say, probably about 7 or 8 years.
I love
And initially,
that program.
it was a program sponsored through Salesforce to allow veterans the ability to learn Salesforce, not only online, but in a classroom environment. And since then, we've expanded that to not only veterans, but also active duty military, as well as their spouses or significant others.
That's
and so the
awesome.
idea there is that if you're a husband or wife or partner, they're in the military, and you're looking for some additional income, you can take that with you. It's transferable. And VetForce is really focused not only, as I said, on online learning, but also in classroom learning. And then with VetForce, we also help you find a position as well as part of that program. So I always urge people, just Google Salesforce and VetForce, and you'll find that program. Same thing with Salesforce and Trailhead. Just Google those two terms, and you'll find them instantly.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. It was such a great idea because, I grew up in a military family. My dad was in the military, and you move every 2 years. And so thinking about that being an option for the person, like my mom, let's say, who wasn't in the military, right? She was just following my dad, and for her to have that option, like no matter where she lived, to be able to develop some sort of skill that then becomes, something that she could take with her. I think it's a great, great idea that Salesforce has. One of many examples of how Salesforce gives back and is truly an amazing company overall. But let's take it back to projects, I guess, and public sector in general. Is there anything more about Hawaii? Because the other thing I wanted to ask you before we talk about this was maybe some advantages that, I know you don't do maybe a ton of commercial work, but you have some exposure there, but you sometimes look at them and think, wow, in the government space, they do have some sort of advantage that they should, because I think people are bound with like, oh, we have our budget cycles and we have our resource constraints and we have our procurement, this and that. And so it'd be nice to see from your perspective as an outsider kind of looking into your clients sometimes thinking, hey, you do have some advantages as a public sector organization that, you could leverage on your projects. Is there any that come to mind for you?
Well, I think it does, and it goes back to standardization and being able to have some focus on the technology they're using within a state or a county or a city, and that's being able to have some limited choices. You don't necessarily sometimes want to be totally prescriptive,
right.
But at the same time want to try and limit your portfolio of technology so that it's easy to maintain and support, as well as have the education behind it.
Yeah.
And so what we typically find is that in the government space, they can usually do that type of limitation, where you can say, okay, I'm going to have maybe this as a ERP system for my state, and I'm going to have this as my CRM platform for my state, I'm going to have this as my development platform for my state. Yep. And then you can start to, really make that as part of your overall IT strategy. And that comes, of course, from leadership, whether it's political leadership or technical leadership, from the ETS, from the CIO's office. But those are some advantages that I think that government has in terms of can dictate some of that.
And it's difficult to execute, but a good advantage.
Precisely. And so I think that, again, the whole idea is public good. And being able to come up with a set of programs and a strategic plan that supports that public good and how best can we deliver on that, I think is important. Commercial entities, they're built on a profit margin. They're not there necessarily for the public good. Although I know that our CEO, Mark Benioff, would say, well, we are here for the public good, and Salesforce most definitely is. But generally speaking, the commercial marketplace, a little bit different. So I think with the government, their focus being on the citizen, on the constituent, on the resident, on that family, on that household, on that whole person. There's a more altruistic notion with government that is not there in the commercial marketplace.
Very good point. Okay. The other question I had is, in your last several years of working with Salesforce, maybe this goes with what you just now said, is there any advice that you wish you could just tell a customer, but you gotta kind of bite your tongue and maybe not let it out? You're like, gee, if I could just tell you this thing, this one or two golden nuggets that you wish you could say. Have there been a few that come to mind?
Well, I think kind of right along the lines of that last theme that I underscored, that, again, public good. What happens with agencies, and not unlike business units within a corporate environment, is that they each have different missions, they have their own P&L, they have, again, sometimes their own resources, assets, and everything else that they are managing, and sometimes it's easy to get stuck in a stovepipe, getting stuck in that vertical element within an organization. But again, because of the nature of government and the need to serve the people, I always want to urge them to is just share more, kind of break that down. Don't be so defensive and protective of your agency, of your environment. And the other thing too that's difficult is when you are in a department, you're also protecting your people and your budget. Less people, less budget. And so again, it's hard to be able to unlink those two from what you feel is valuable as a director for an agency or department versus ultimately what would be right for the public good. And so those are the things that I'd want to be able to kind of just sometimes take directors from different departments and put them in a room together and say, okay,
work it out.
Work this stuff through. But I think that and also just leveraging the platform. Again, sometimes there's that myopic view of this is my application or my solution or my business group within an agency. And you don't think beyond that. The platform can do so much. People say, what can the platform do? It can do everything. And so test it, give it the opportunity. All of our customers, whenever they're getting their licenses for their particular project, they have a large number of sandboxes. And the sandboxes are there for a reason. Play. Plus we offer free sandboxes through our trial orgs and developer orgs that anyone can have access to. So always suggest, just go in there, just get a sandbox open, start playing, work within the environment, and be amazed at what you can achieve.
Yeah, that's good advice. I would say, I'm going to answer my own question too. I think one of the things that I would say, and this isn't, again, like for me, because I work with all types of customers, not just public sector, I think it goes back to your point about that perspective, right? Thinking about what are we trying to accomplish. Don't lose sight of the perspective and get caught up in those little, whether it's a silo or whether it's individual, objective that kind of takes precedence. Really go back to the objective, right? Think back to why we set out to do this and think of it as a journey, right? A lot of times people are like, oh, well, I can't get this right now. And when you think about it as a journey and you move on that journey, it's pretty amazing. I think what I've seen some customers that really embrace that and say, this is MVP, we're starting here, we move on to this, we move on to that, and you kind of all of a sudden you look over your shoulder and you're like, wow, we implemented a lot of stuff here. But if you get caught up in that grind, you're just like, man, I wish let's just move on. Let's just keep moving it ahead. And it's hard to say that sometimes, where you're like, oh, you're battling out some little issue, and you lose sight of the bigger picture. You lose sight of that perspective. And I think that's similar to what you were saying. Any other thoughts? Because I'm going to end with a use case of the day. So if you have any other thoughts before then, anything related to public sector, some good use cases that you've seen.
Well, one thing I was going to touch on this briefly. I know I got talking about Trailhead quite a bit, but our customer success team. I think that's an area that is a great resource. It's an asset that all of our customers have, and their customer success manager is there to help them be exactly that, successful. And he or she is not there, like me, to sell licenses. They're there for success and success only. Yep. And so with that said, there are a number of programs that are available, accelerator programs, or 240 plus available that follow areas in which you can maximize your investment in Salesforce, different functionality it has. There's small service engagements, they're no cost. Yep. It's an area that more of our customers need to take advantage of and have his regular QSRs, quarterly success reviews, and I mean have them diligently. Have them every quarter, just like it says, because that's going to make a huge difference on adoption across your enterprise.
That's a really good piece of advice. It's very specific, but I like it because I think it underpins like all the other stuff that we're saying, right? You've got to identify someone that's going to own this application and take over the support and take you on this journey. I mean, all that stuff kind of ties together, and there are a lot of resources. Like customer success is huge, and a lot of customers forget that it's there. And I'm glad you brought that up because it's so true. There's all these resources available, in addition to Trailhead, that is kind of self-service. So cool. All right. Well, we will transition to the use case of the day. So use case of the day is something that I wanted to have on the podcast where it's really not meant to be a right or wrong answer. It's more to just kind of get the mind going about a very general type of question that people have. In this case, I'm going to paint a little small picture and really just think through how we would address it or maybe talk through it. So we have a public sector client. They want to really take on a large digital transformation. They currently have a lot of legacy systems. They've got a lot of disparate technologies, a lot of manual processing, paperwork, things like that. And we hear a lot of people with paper in the public sector. I'm picking on that because it's our theme, but honestly, we have a lot of commercial clients with paper too. And so I get this question a lot. They've got this big landscape. It feels a bit overwhelming. The question is, where do I begin? How do you approach solving that where do I begin question, particularly when it feels so overwhelming? I have so many technologies. I have all these manual processes. I have all these people. How do you talk them through how to approach that kind of a challenge?
From a Salesforce perspective?
Yes.
Okay.
Always.
Well, okay. 5-letter word.
Okay.
SPARK.
Nice one.
Spark. So a spark, for those unfamiliar with the term, is a program that's available.
Thanks for not saying 4-letter word, by the way.
No.
I was a little worried for a moment. I was like, wait.
No. Just want to make sure that we're ethical here. In terms of the approach on a spark, and it from the standpoint of wanting to kind of spark ideas, spark thoughts, spark what's possible. And it is an exercise that we conduct on behalf for the customer, on behalf of Salesforce, and it can kind of go in two different directions. It can be an application portfolio exercise, where we're looking at the applications that they have, and that becomes part of the digital transformation. So it could be an application deep dive. A good example would be we have customers, especially in the public sector, that have legacy apps, whether they're still on a mainframe, as we said, client server, or even applications that are difficult to support, Power Builder, Cold Fusion, Access databases, other COTS applications that have gotten old and no one knows how to maintain it anymore, and if you do, that person's already retired or about to retire. So doing a deep dive on that application portfolio to be able to then understand in that group what would then make sense to bring over to the platform. And so we established with a customer when we go through that exercise is the methodology behind how we come up with a return on investment. What's key to that is establishing a total cost of ownership. And so the total cost of ownership model we use is something that was developed through IDC, so a third-party consulting organization, kind of like Gartner or Forrester. And so we established that as kind of our benchmark. And once the customer agrees that that's really what we're going to be using to gauge moving forward with applications, whether they go on the platform or not, we can then ultimately do get to that return on investment. That total cost of ownership model helps substantiate it. So we put together a heat map, and whether it's high productivity with low effort is really the sweet spot that we're looking for, and then determine some applications you're not going to move to the platform. They might integrate. They may still coexist as they currently are. But the idea is to take a look at that portfolio and see what we can do to help modernize it. It makes it mobile, makes it available on any platform. Analytics and dashboards are just right out of the box, so it improves the possible capabilities for either that agency or maybe the city or county or state as a whole. The other piece would be working on a particular process, a business process, whether maybe it's around a welfare system or unemployment insurance or workforce development. The idea is that we can get specific around a given process and see the workflow, the integration points, and how we might be able to improve that. So to answer your question, again, just going back to it, Spark is a good universal approach. The great thing about it for customers is the only thing that it costs is their time.
Yep.
So
that's a good one. What does the output look like at the end of the Spark?
So the deliverable would be a breakdown of the applications, all the applications we looked at, and then which applications were then considered to be potentially reviewed. So I'll give you an example. We did one for a city back not too long ago. We looked at over 700 applications.
Wow.
Of those 700 applications, really 173, I believe, were the ones that we thought were worthwhile to review and pursue. And of those 173, 58 were actually selected to be able to move to the platform and through a 6-phase process.
That's awesome.
And so the idea
so it gives them sort of a roadmap.
Absolutely.
That's awesome.
That's precisely what it is. So it's a blueprint or roadmap to take them from phase one.
The answer. Where do I begin? Right here.
That's right.
Oh, that's perfect. That's a great. That's great. That's awesome. So, Bob, thank you for taking time. I'm super excited about tomorrow, and always a joy to meet with you. And I'm so glad to have the opportunity to continue to work with you in Hawaii. It's been fun.
Well, let me just plug again. Innovation Day at the Hawaii Convention Center on Tuesday, October 8th from 8 to 3:30. You can still go ahead and register. And if you have any questions, let us know.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.